Hey, happy Monday, Cubs fans. It is October 21st. We are talking about, are the Cubs even close to contention in 2025? I got to go to the Dodgers game 6 last night. I'm working off about 4 hours of sleep right now. I'm literally going to go nap for a week after I'm done recording this one. It was a blast. Went with my family, went with a couple friends. My daughter, who, as a lot of you know, is 20 months old, just braves her way through all these games. She loves them. She sings "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" every out of the game. My wife is a huge Dodgers fan. No, I didn't wear Dodgers gear. I got that question from a few people on social media. I would not disgrace and be disloyal to the Cubs like that. My wife, however, though, I do convince her to wear Cubs gear when it's a Cubs game, believe it or not, even though she's a Dodgers fan. So I'm not going to do that. It's not going to happen. So I got to watching this game, and I'm there as a fan. First of all, I can tell you as a fan, this was a really cool experience for someone who went to 2 games during the 2016 playoff series and saw 2 losses. By the way, I think I'm now 0-4. Yes, I'm 0-4 in Cubs playoff games. I went to a couple in college when they were going through that run in 07 and 08. And then I went to 2 in 2016. I went to game 3 of the Giants and Cubs where they lost in extra innings. And then I went to game 3 against the Cubs and Dodgers where the Cubs lost, I think it was 5-0 and went behind 2-1 in the series. And then I ran out of money and couldn't go to the World Series. And that was the time of the life that I was in. And so being a baseball fan and going and supporting my wife and watching the Dodgers make it all the way and actually claim an NL pennant as a baseball fan is pretty cool. As a husband, was a lot of fun to see my wife excited. Did I wish it was the Cubs? 100%. But of course, watching this just made me kind of evaluate as well, how far the Cubs away from this. And so then this morning, Patrick Mooney came out with an article, and I just kind of wanted to go over all this stuff today. Now, really quickly, side note, for those of you that don't watch the show, my name's Kyle Stanley. This is the Setup Man. We talk mainly about the Cubs. Every once in a while, we talk about MLB playoffs. But during this road trip yesterday, I did have an idea from a friend, and I wanted to pass this by you guys. 95% of you that watch this channel, thank you for watching. If you're new, please subscribe, especially if you're a Cubs fan. Many of you who watch this channel are males. You are men, and you love baseball, and you love to talk about baseball like me. Now, not many get to live the life that I'm living, where I actually have a wife who is a baseball fan. But I can tell you that she was a casual baseball fan when we met. She would watch it if it was on. Now, like me, she's in it, right? She's diehard. If the Dodgers lose, she's upset. If the Cubs lose, she's upset because I'm upset. And so I got to talking with these friends that went to the game with us yesterday, and they were like, hey, one of the things that we really love that you do is you travel and you bring your family, and you guys are like a baseball family. And we would love to know more about that. We would love to see more about that. And we would love to see that because we feel like we have a lot of friends who are guys that are into baseball, but their wives aren't into baseball. And to see that family atmosphere and to know that this can be a family affair would be really cool for them. And I got to thinking about you guys out here in Setup Nation. And I'm just wondering, are you out there and wondering hey, that would be kind of cool to have my wife listen in on this channel or listen in on this podcast because it's more of a family tie. So we're thinking about creating another, I guess, to make a long story short, I'm thinking about creating another podcast where probably messing around with the name a little bit, maybe We Are a Baseball Family or the Baseball Family Podcast, where you can bring your love, meaning your wife, and your love for baseball and entwine it together and listen in on what does it look like to be a baseball family and to travel to games. If you've got young kids, how you're bringing them to games. And this would be kind of 2 parts for me. 1, to help all of you and to, bring more of the family into baseball. But number 2, it would also be just selfishly, I want to document what we're doing for my daughter. She's 20 months old. I kind of wish I would have had this idea maybe a year ago so we could go back and do that. But I mean, we've gone to 25 games in the last 2 years, and she's been a part of all of them. Would that be cool for you? Would that be fun for you? Let me know in the comments if you're watching on this channel. If you're not watching on this channel, definitely go watch on the YouTube channel as well. But you could also email me, kyle@setupman.net. And once again, thank you all for subscribing. Thank you for being here. Let's get into now the meat of this, which is, are the Cubs even close to contention here going into 2025? The takeaways that I'm going to do 2 takeaways. First of all, I'm going to do kind of like a thought of what I saw last night on the field. We'll come back and we'll go deeper into that as well a little bit later on. But also, I want to do a takeaway of what Patrick Mooney said in his article. And then I want to kind of outline how far does that put us away from actually being a part of the conversation in 2025? So the first things that I thought of when I'm watching the Dodgers and them just taking it to the Mets last night was the Dodgers have the stars, right? They have the Otanis, they have the Freddie Freemans, they have the Mookie Betts. They took some chances on guys like Tyler Glass. Now they took a $325 million chance on Yamamoto. And when he has been healthy, it's worked. But of course, he wasn't healthy for most of the year. They have the lockdown bullpen. They've literally had 2 wins out of 3 games where they've had bullpen games. And like last night and like in the first try with the Padres, it went really well. The second try there, I believe it was game 2 against the Mets. It kind of crashed and burned, but they have a lockdown bullpen that, they're going to be in pretty good shape if they have a lead after 7 innings. And then they made the moves at the trade deadline, kind of under the radar moves that you think to yourself, I don't really know how well this is going to go for the Dodgers. They got Jack Flaherty, who was having a good season, but he was bouncing back from a subpar last couple of years with both injuries and underperforming games. And then Michael Kopech, who has always had the stuff and never had the success. And then Tommy Edman, who literally, I don't think his first game was until middle of August. And I think they got him when he was on the disabled list, the injured list, I should say. Can't remember the exact status, but it was kind of like, okay, these are some nice moves, but man, they must have known something about these 3 guys, because they were able to turn these guys into Tommy Edman, the NLCS MVP, Michael Kopech, one of the most dominant relievers once he went over to the Dodgers, and then Jack Flaherty, who pitched major games in the playoffs and was lights out for a lot of those until this last one where he was not very good in game 5 against the Mets. But you look at this, and these were kind of the special sauce, the stars, the bullpen, and then those moves at the trade deadline. And, you can think back to 2016 and compare that to the Cubs when they won the World Series. A lot of the things we could do there, but I'm not going to go into that right now. So in knowing these things, then the next morning, this morning here on October 21st, I wake up and I see Patrick Mooney's article. Great article. If you haven't seen it, go check it out on The Athletic. And it just made me even realize more and more just how far away the organization is even from thinking like the Dodgers. Because in this article, and I'll just kind of summarize it for you, long story short, Patrick said to start that they're going to be going after a catcher, they're going to be going after a starter, and they're going to react to Cody Bellinger's decision of if he's opting in or opting out. Those are Patrick words. Those are not Jed's words. Those are not Carter's words or Council's words. Those are just essentially what we and what we've been kind of talking about already on this show and a lot of other Cubs podcasts. And he really goes into next, basically just kind of throw out the idea of getting Juan Soto, right? Which I've been saying as well, because I just don't think that's where the organization is at. I don't think they're ready to drop 500 to 700 million. If they weren't willing to do that for Ohtani, who was going to make them all that money back probably in year 1, they're probably not going to do that for Soto, who, while he is an amazing player, is not as marketable as Ohtani. So in thinking about all that, the most cost-effective way, Patrick basically says, is like, hey, let's see them go get a serviceable starter and secure the bullpen with some pickups, which isn't that exciting, but it's the truth. And one of the things that was kind of cool, what I liked about this article, was that Patrick goes into this conversation he had with Tommy Hotovy, and what is that blueprint for a starter? And basically Tommy said, hey, he's got to be reliable. He's got to be healthy. He's got to throw lots of strikes. And they got to be great students of the games. They got to be willing to say, here's what I do well, but here's what I'm still working on. And that was the blueprint for Shota Imanaga and Jameson Taillon, both of the Cubs' most recent pickups for starters. Aside from Jameson's first 3-ish months as a Cub, it's been great, right? So these are really good blueprints, but I think we can all admit that when Jameson Taillon was signed, we didn't think he was an ace. And he hasn't been. He's been good. We didn't think Shota Imanaga was an ace, but he turned into an ace, which is pretty incredible. And a roll of the dice that they didn't really take. They didn't pay him ace money and say, man, we sure hope that just like Yamamoto, we're paying, close to Yamamoto money and we hope that this guy becomes an ace. No, they paid him even less than they paid Taillon, and they got really an ace out of it. If you look at it, the Cubs, I think they said were 23-6 in Shota Imanaga's starts this year, which is wild. You didn't think that that was going to happen. So if they take that same blueprint and apply it to, a starter this offseason who fits that mold. Well, in this article, Patrick talked about Max Fried. That one excites me. Long-term deal. He's friends with Dansby Swanson. Nathan Eovaldi, he would have to actually opt out of his Rangers deal first. But from a short-term perspective, especially since you lose Kyle Hendricks, who was a veteran, I do like that on a short-term deal. And then you kind of talk about some of these more rolling of the dice because of injuries. Walker Buehler and Shane Bieber. Both would be bounce-back projects. You don't know what you're going to get out of them. Walker Buehler, I would assume, would probably start to find a lot of the stuff that he had before. He was rushed kind of this year into getting back on the field, at least from an outsider's perspective, and that's why you have seen him not have the same swing and miss stuff. And a lot of times, guys, they get back from injuries, arm injuries, and it's going to be a year or so until they really find themselves again. Shane Bieber would be the same. I think that was his, I could be wrong on this, I think it was his second Tommy John. I know that he at least had Tommy John, and for that reason, you really worry about, even if he's going to be available until maybe even the summer. And so those are the kind of projects that don't excite me as much, but could have some payoff. And then Nick Martinez was also referenced in this article. He's 34 years old, but he had a 4-WAR season, which would be the top pitcher on the Cubs if you put him on the Cubs right now, which is crazy. I don't know how exactly WAR is calculated, but to think that Shota Imanaga had a lower WAR season than Nick Martinez, I just don't buy that. I don't. So it's weird to me that Shota Imanaga, for those of you that don't know, I think it was a 3-0 or a 3-1 WAR. That seems low to me. Long story short, though, before I go off on a tangent on that, he went into this, and my thought was, yes, this would be nice, but I don't really know that I put the starter as the top hierarchy of needs for the Cubs. I think if I'm going to rank it, it's going to be number one is secure the bullpen. You look at all the blown saves. I think if I'm correctly quoting this, I think it was like 23 blown saves for the Cubs this year. It's somewhere around there. You're not going to secure every single lead, right? Like, let's just throw that out the window. But assuming they lost 23 games that they led in late, if you can cut that in half, right? If you can just say, hey, we went from 23 down to like 12, 13, 14, you've got a playoff team. Absolutely. So that's the easiest thing to target as number one. This would have made us a playoff team if this bullpen was secure and good for especially that kind of May-ish time when they were blowing things left and right. Number two would be get a big bat, especially if Bellinger opts out. Even if he doesn't opt out, they should still be looking for some way to put in a dangerous threat in the middle of that lineup. And Bellinger was that guy in 23. He wasn't that guy in 24. Don't care where you stand on that right now. That's not part of the conversation right now. But if he opts out, it frees up $27.5 million that you can go and spend somewhere else. And then number three is a starting pitcher, which is what we talked about in this article with Patrick Mooney. And or I would kind of put right next to that another catcher. And The reason I don't put that above a starting pitcher is because there is a lot of excitement around Moises Ballesteros. I don't know about the defensive side, but he's hitting 419 in the fall league in Arizona and 826 OPS between AA and AAA this last year. And so for that reason, I'm okay with a Ballesteros and a Maya 1-2 punch going into the season. Am I like, that's the best one in the league? Absolutely not. But I'm okay with that if we start that way for 2025. Now, the reason I do like what Patrick pointed out in this article of getting a starter is, to me, it's kind of a 2-for-1 deal. Even though it's number 3 on the list, according to my list, I think if you get a starter, you also automatically add depth to your bullpen. Assuming that Ben Brown and Cade Horton are back and healthy, assuming that Hayden Wesneski is back, Jordan Wicks are back. A lot of those guys had either health issues or they were bouncing back between AAA and the majors, mainly just Hayden. You've got guys in the bullpen that add depth. Especially we saw what Ben Brown could do in the bullpen, and especially with as highly touted as Cade Horton is, you can imagine both of those guys, if healthy, being a back of the bullpen as they're getting into their career. Maybe eventually they become starters. We've talked about before the Brewers did that with Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff. Maybe they could do that as well with Cade Horton and Ben Brown, or maybe both of them just become dominant back of the bullpen guys, which is exactly what you would need anyway. So I like, if you get a starter, doing that because it automatically adds depth. The question marks become Jordan Wicks in the bullpen. Hayden Wesneski has had multiple chances to prove that he's a major leaguer, and aside from a nice stretch to start his career with the Cubs in 2022, he just hasn't been consistent. So he's got to take it up to the next level this year. But that kind of leads you to all of the next questions for the Cubs and answers this question of how close are they to being a contender. And to do that, we skim the surface. Going back to the Dodgers, we skim the surface. If you remember in the beginning, I mentioned, hey, they've got the stars, they got the lockdown bullpen, and they made those moves at the deadline. But now, like, look at the 4 teams. We'll call them the final 4: the Dodgers, the Mets, the Guardians, and the Yankees. And when you look at the star power on those teams, Guardians, Jose Ramirez, Manuel Clase, whatever. Clase had a terrible postseason, but he still was, 0.61 ERA during the season, best closer in baseball this year. You've also got rising stars in Tanner Bybee and Cade Smith. The Yankees, Garrett Cole, Carlos Rodon, Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, Giancarlo Stanton, now that he's hitting again. There's a lot of these guys that you can look at and say those are all stars. They're not just all stars, they're also all stars. The Mets, Francisco Lindor, Edwin Diaz, Mark Vientos is a rising star. He's been amazing during the playoffs. They guessed really well about some of these guys for bounce back seasons, and Sean Manaea helps them tweak some things. Luis Severino, they had great seasons. You can put Pete Alonso kind of in this category, although he's had a couple down years, but you would still consider him a star. And then the Dodgers, of course, Ohtani, Freeman, Betts, Teoscar Hernandez had the best year of his career. And they've got the lockdown bullpen. Maybe not the big names like the Emmanuel Clases, but the Trinans, the Evan Phillips of the world. This is a lockdown bullpen. And when you think about that, just take like a step back for a second and compare that to the Cubs. It raises a lot of questions. And it's disappointing because I think back in 2022, you're like, hey, maybe this will be like the 2015 version of the Cubs. And then it wasn't. But they had a good back half of the year. And you say, hey, maybe we can really get some momentum and go into 2023. And then 23, they start off really bad. And then they become contenders at the end of the year. You think, okay, now it's time for that 90-win season. And then Jed and crew just don't do enough, aside from getting counsel and making a couple moves. They don't do enough to even be projected as close to a 90-win team. All of these teams that you just saw, maybe with the exception of the Mets and Guardians, you thought that they were going to be contending at the end of the year. Yankees and Dodgers. Mets had guys that were fallen stars that rose again. The Guardians shocked, I think, everyone, because they looked like sellers of this last offseason, but they still had that star power. They still had these guys. And now with the rising stars coming up and some of these guys that they guessed really well on, it went well. But the question for the Cubs is, do they have the foundation or do they have just a lot of questions? And here are the main questions. Like when I look at this team right now and you wonder, like, hey, could Dansby go out and have an 800 OPS year? His top year is, I think, 774. He was like a 6 WAR player that year. Could he go and do that again? Yeah, maybe. Could Cody Bellinger opt in and have a 900 OPS year? He was 881 back in 2023 and be that middle of the lineup bat, 30 plus home runs. He could, maybe. Could Isak Paredes bounce back and do what he did in 2023 where he had 31 home runs? Maybe. Could Michael Busch take that next step? He was really good. He was a serviceable first baseman, a serviceable rookie here in year one, but could he go from 20-ish home runs to 30-plus home runs, and now you start drawing Anthony Rizzo comparisons? Maybe. Seiya Suzuki, best year of his career. Could he still have that next step in him? Every single year he's gotten better from a numbers basis. I'm not talking about how you feel about the guy. I'm talking about from a numbers basis. The OPS especially went up every single year. Does he have 900 OPS in him? Does he have 30 home runs in him? It seems like every year you think that Seiya is going to take that next step. He was still the Cubs' best hitter, but when we look at the reality, their best hitter isn't dangerous enough to scare an opposing team. So can he take that next step? Can Cade Horton or Ben Brown develop into an ace or a lockdown closer? Can Moises Ballesteros be that number one catcher and do it on both sides, the catching and the hitting side? Will PCA be the Cubs version of Jackson Chourio this next year, where he has 20 plus home runs, has close to an 800 OPS, and continues that, near Gold Glove defense? Can Porter Hodge develop into a full-time closer? Will Adbert Alzolay come back and be that full-time closer, which probably wouldn't even happen until middle to end of the year next year? There's so many questions, and that's where I don't feel like this team right now is even part of the conversation when it comes to a 90-win team. That's the goal. You heard Craig Counsell say it at the end of the year. This team has no excuses, should be a 90-win team, but there's too many question marks. It's all on Jed. It's all on Carter. It's all on the front office. It's on Tom Ricketts to say, yes, go spend the money to get, to me, if you do the following, we already talked about it, a starter, meaning really a serious ace. We have Shota and we have Justin Steele, who are both aces in their own respect. And the reason I'm hesitant to even say that is because they haven't done it back-to-back years, right? We haven't seen a second year from Shota yet. And then Justin Steele dealt with a lot of injuries this year. When he was pitching, he was an ace-like kind of guy. But comparing him to 2023, Justin, he hasn't done that 2 years in a row. Can they go out and get an ace that then makes think about that for a second. An ace followed by Justin Steele and Shota Imanaga. Then you have Jameson Taillon as your number 4, and then Javier Assad probably is number 5. Wow, right? Like, that would be fun. A big bat. Put a big bat in this lineup. I don't know who it is. I don't think it's Pete Alonso. That's not the guy I'm looking for, but it's probably going to come via a trade and make this lineup scary. Make it scary, not just good, but scary, and have guys like Matt Shaw and Moises Ballesteros come up and do their thing with less pressure and get a lockdown closer. If you do those 3 things, if you even do 2 of those 3 things, now you're talking about, to me, a 90-win team or close to a 90-win team. And now there's less question marks and more, hey, if these things pan out, we could be talking about, instead of just an 88 to 90-win team, now a 95-win team. Too much of this team right now is, if it goes well, they could be a 90-win team. That was the issue with the 2024 Cubs. It didn't work out very well. They repeated for an 83-win season. They need to go out and they need to answer questions and make the other questions that are putting them kind of on the bubble in some of these positions the luxuries, not the necessities, if that makes any sense. So let me know what you think. subscribe, comment, like. We would love it all. This is, to me right now, going into the World Series. You look at the World Series teams, and I think I saw something from Locked On Cubs that they said Cubs were 4-2 against the Dodgers this year, 1-2 against the Yankees, outscored them, yada yada. That's all great, but in a short series, I'm terrified of both those teams. I'm just not scared of what the Cubs have right now, and that's where there's a big gap between the Cubs and a World Series. So let me know what you think in the comments. And I'm going to go nap because I am exhausted from the road trip last night. I'm going to go put my arm on ice, Cubs fans. We'll see you next time.